Alright, you know what I love about old cartoon shows is that all the characters have such weird names. Take for example the show we're looking at today. You have Rocket J. Squirrel, Bullwinkle J. Moose, Natasha Fatale, Boris Badenoff, Fearless Leader. It's almost as if somebody took words and slammed them together and called it a day. That would be like me trying to create a character and coming up with a name like William Dangerpants. Yeah, doesn't exactly work. But then, years later, somebody looked at all those names and thought, you know what this deserves? A live-action Hollywood movie. And we get to look at that today. Well, let's get into it. Roll the intro. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Big Screen Leap, the show where we take stories from words, pencils, and scripts and see how they land as Hollywood hits. I'm your host, William Redman. Today, we're looking at one of the strangest cartoons ever made. That's it, it's just strange. Today, we're looking at the 1959 cartoon Rocky and Bullwinkle and comparing it to its 2000 live-action release, The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle, starring Robert DeNiro, Rene Russo, Jason Alexander, and surprisingly, a decent cast list that we'll talk about later. When people think about Rocky and Bullwinkle, usually they think about a flying squirrel, a not-so-smart moose, and villains that sound like rejected Bond characters. But underneath the bad puns and ridiculous adventures, there's a story about satire, political jokes, fourth wall breaks, and enough entertainment for both adults and children. Then, years later, Hollywood looked at this in the year 2000 and said, what if we mixed live-action CGI, celebrity cameos, and enough fourth wall jokes to make Deadpool proud? The result? One of the most bizarre family movies ever made. So today, we're here to ask the question, did Rocky and Bullwinkle make the leap from TV to movie, or should this have stayed frozen in reruns? Well, let's find out. Nothing can stop me from a plot, except for maybe a stampede of elephants. The show Rocky and Friends, later renamed The Bullwinkle Show, premiered in 1959, and unlike other cartoons of the era, this didn't just tell one story. In fact, it was a variety show. The main attraction followed Rocket J. Squirrel, also known as Rocky, and Bullwinkle J. Moose. Bullwinkle is lovable, optimistic, and about as intelligent as a potato wearing antlers. Rocky is the brain of the operations. He constantly has to rescue Bullwinkle from his own terrible decisions. At first glance, it looked like your average Saturday morning cartoon. There were colorful characters, goofy villains, and over-the-top adventures. But after watching just one episode, you quickly realize this isn't just a kids show. Every adventure usually began with the pair accidentally stumbling into some world-threatening problem. Their primary enemies were Boris Badenoff and Natasha Fatale, two spies from the fictional nation of Pottsylvania who work under the command of Fearless Leader. The two constantly try to steal inventions, capture Bullwinkle, or conquer America through hilariously incompetent schemes. Each episode ended with a cliffhanger that promised viewers don't miss out on our next exciting episode, which usually had some kind of ridiculous title. Alongside Rocky and Bullwinkle were several recurring segments. You had Peabody's Improbable History, where the world's smartest dog and his adopted son Sherman traveled through history. Then you had Fractured Fairy Tales, parodying classic fairy tales with a sarcastic twist. Then you had Dudley Do-Right, a spoof of melodramatic adventure series about a Canadian Mountie. And at some point, I'm going to have to do an episode for both Peabody And Dudley Do-Right. Ugh. One of the show's greatest strengths is its writing. This wasn't a cartoon that relied on flashy animation or giant action scenes. Instead, it packed nearly every minute with puns, wordplay, visual gags, running jokes, and references to politics, history, literature, television, and pop culture. Kids could laugh at Bullwinkle getting hit by a pie, while adults caught jokes referencing Shakespeare, Cold War politics, or government bureaucracy. Honestly, it was kind of a kid-friendly version of The Simpsons before The Simpsons existed. The show also loved breaking the fourth wall. Characters regularly spoke directly with the audience, argued with the narrator, acknowledged they were in a television show, and even made jokes about the show's budget. There are moments where the narrator gets frustrated with the characters, moments where the characters question the script, but thankfully, here on the Big Screen Leap, you'd never see William arguing with the narrator. Hey, wait a second. I didn't write that. Yes, you did. Okay, can we not do this right now? Do what? Get into an argument while we're filming? Well, I'm just trying to show the audience that you'd never do something as ridiculous as argue with me on the show. Okay, but you're arguing with me right now. Well, you started it. No, you started it! Wait a second. I voiced both of us. Yes, but you don't voice me very well. You know what? That's it. You're fired. Wait, you're firing yourself? That's very confusing. Can we just get on with it, please? Okay, fine. Reluctantly, the handsome and incredibly talented narrator... I didn't write that! Another thing that made the show special was that it never rushed. Even though episodes were relatively short, adventures stretched across multiple chapters. That gave the writers plenty of opportunities to throw in detours, side jokes, fake cliffhangers, and absurd situations that often had little to do with the main plot, but were hilarious nonetheless. The stakes were usually enormous. World domination, secret weapons, government conspiracies, hidden treasure, time travel. Yet the show never took itself seriously, even for a second. That's really the magic of Rocky and Bullwinkle. It's a show where the heroes can save the world while arguing over terrible puns, where villains fail because they're just as incompetent as the people trying to stop them, and where the narrator may be the only sane person in the entire universe. But somehow, against all odds, it's surprisingly brilliant. Fast forward to the year 2000, Hollywood doesn't just adapt one of Rocky and Bullwinkle's adventures. Instead, it asks a very important question. What happens when cartoon characters realize they've been canceled? The movie opens with Rocky and Bullwinkle living in the fictional cartoon world known as Frostbite Falls. Years have passed since their television series ended, and because nobody watches the show anymore, the two heroes have essentially become washed-up celebrities. They're no longer saving the world. Instead, they're signing autographs at tiny fan conventions and living off the memories of the good old days. Meanwhile, their longtime enemies, Boris and Natasha, are literally trapped inside the cartoon world. Since the show was canceled before they could finish one of their schemes, they've been imprisoned in a sort of cartoon limbo. Their boss, fearless leader, hasn't exactly been living the dream either. He's been reduced from an evil dictator bent on world domination to running a failing internet company while still dreaming of conquering America. Fearless Leader then discovers a machine capable of transporting cartoon characters into the real world. He frees Boris and Natasha, who suddenly find themselves interacting with actual humans. Since they're no longer confined by cartoon logic, they finally have the opportunity to carry out the plan they've been waiting decades to complete. And what is their master plan, you ask? To hypnotize all of America through television. So basically what TV companies have been doing forever. Fearless Leader purchases a failing television network called RBTV and develops a mind control technology known as CLC, Computerized Learning Center. The idea is that viewers think they're simply watching educational programming, but hidden messages inside the broadcast slowly brainwash them into becoming loyal followers of Fearless Leader. Yeah, we have the same issue that's going on in today's world, but really, it only affects parents. It's called Bluey. Of course, with Boris and Natasha escaping to the real world, someone has to stop them. That responsibility falls once again to Rocky and Bullwinkle. The pair leave their animated universe, and while Boris and Natasha got real bodies, Rocky and Bullwinkle were given CGI upgrades. They discovered that the real world is confusing. They don't understand things like traffic, airports, and people acting as though talking animals are somehow unusual. Along the way, they cross paths with FBI agent Karen Sympathy, played by Piper Perabo. At first, She thinks the entire situation is completely insane. Which, to be fair, it actually is. Imagine trying to explain that to your boss. The fate of the world depends on a flying squirrel and a moose who escaped from television. You're fired. Karen eventually teams up with Rocky and Bullwinkle to stop the dastardly trio. They race across the country trying to stop the villains before millions of Americans fall under fearless leaders' control. The journey is basically one giant excuse for non-stop comedy. Every few minutes, the movie throws another gag at the audience. Sometimes it's slapstick, sometimes it's visual humor, sometimes it's another awful pun, and sometimes it's characters arguing with the movie itself. We're not doing that again. Oh, come on! One of the biggest trademarks carried over from the television series is the constant destruction of the fourth wall. Characters know they're fictional, they know they're in a movie, they complain about the scripts, acknowledge the product placement, question the narrator, and even poke fun at Universal Pictures. And in the spirit of the movie, I'm gonna make fun of them too. Granted, they'll probably just respond by sending me a copyright claim, and then make fun of me when I try to send my dispute. I just hope a human reads it this time. The film is also packed with celebrity cameos that often appear for only a few seconds before disappearing again. Rather than slowing the story down, these cameos almost become part of the joke, reinforcing that this world is every bit as absurd as the cartoon it came from. Eventually, the heroes discover the full extent of Fearless Leader's brainwashing operation and launch one final assault on RBTV headquarters. What follows is exactly the kind of chaotic climax you'd expect from Rocky and Bullwinkle. Cartoon physics, ridiculous disguises, impossible escapes, over-the-top villain speeches, and plenty of opportunities for Boris and Natasha's carefully crafted plan to fall apart in spectacular fashion. Which they do. Rocky and Bullwinkle save the day, the villains are defeated, and Rocky and Bullwinkle are celebrated as heroes again. But perhaps the funniest part of the ending is that nothing about it feels like a typical Hollywood finale. There isn't some emotional speech about believing in yourself, there's no dramatic sacrifice, there isn't even a particularly serious final battle. Instead, the movie ends much the way the series always did, with jokes, chaos, bad puns, and characters who seem perfectly aware that entertaining the audience is more important than making complete sense. And honestly, for a movie based on Rocky and Bullwinkle, that could have been the most faithful choice they made. The original series was created by Jay Ward and became one of the most influential cartoons of all time. The animation was extremely limited due to a small budget. The characters barely moved, sometimes only their mouths were animated. Jay Ward knew his studio couldn't compete with other animation productions, so instead of trying to outdraw everyone else, he decided to outwrite them. Like I said, instead of relying on flashy visuals, the show leaned heavy into brilliant dialogue. Voice actor June Foray brought Rocky and Natasha to life. What's interesting to note is that Foray is often considered the first lady of voice acting. Her skill was quite amazing, as she was able to voice both the energetic Rocky and the smooth, sarcastic voice of Natasha. Bill Scott voiced Bullwinkle. He also worked behind the scenes as a writer and producer. Then you have Paul Frees, who's considered one of the best voice actors of all time. He handled Boris and countless supporting characters, and the narration by William Conrad became another character for the show. He comments on the action, gets frustrated with the heroes, argues with the villains, delivers intentionally overdramatic cliffhangers, and occasionally seems just as confused by the plot as the audience is. And if he was here right now, he'd probably say what an amazing job I'm doing as the narrator for the big screen leap. Nope, not doing it. Oh, come on! Another hallmark of the production was its use of serialized storytelling. Instead of wrapping everything up in a single episode, one adventure could stretch across 8, 10, or even 20 short chapters. Every installment ended with a cliffhanger followed by one of the show's famous next episode titles, which are almost always terrible puns. Half the fun of the show was hearing what ridiculous titles they'd come up with next. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about the production is just how influential it became. Long before shows like the Animaniacs, Tiny Toons, The Simpsons, Futurama, and even Family Guy filled their episodes with pop culture references and humor aimed at adults, Rocky and Bullwinkle had already proven that children's animation could be genuinely clever. Its willingness to break the fourth wall, poke fun at its own budget, reference current events, and trust the audience to understand sophisticated jokes helped change what television animation could be. So yeah, the animation might be dated by today's standards, the movement might be limited, the production value might be modest, but honestly, that didn't stop Rocky and Bullwinkle from becoming one of the most influential cartoons ever made. Universal Pictures released the movie in 2000. Their biggest challenge? How do you take a cartoon where the humor was mostly dialogue and narration? Well, instead of modernizing it, they decided to embrace the insanity. While Boris, Natasha, and Fearless Leader were portrayed by Jason Alexander, Rene Russo, and Robert De Niro, you heard that right. Academy Award winner Robert De Niro spent part of his career going yeah as a cartoon dictator. Honestly, good for him. Rocky and Bullwinkle were CGI characters that interacted with the human characters. Jude Foray returned to do the voice of Rocky for the movie. Unfortunately, William Conrad and Bill Scott had already passed away long before this movie was ever made, so both the narrator in Bullwinkle was voiced by Keith Scott, no relation to Bill whatsoever. The film became famous for an endless parade of celebrity cameos. You had Whoopi Goldberg, Billy Crystal, David Alan Grier, Janine Garofalo, and appearances from big screen Leap alumnus John Goodman, Kel Mitchell, and Kenan Thompson. The filmmakers clearly wanted the movie to feel as chaotic as the original cartoon. Critics praised the commitment to the source material. Unfortunately, audiences largely ignored it. And honestly, it kind of makes sense. The last episode of the show was made in 1963, and while there were reruns in the 80s and the 90s, by the time the 2000s got here, people weren't really watching the duo anymore. Still, later on it did gain a cult following. When looking at the similarities, the movie absolutely understands who Rocky and Bullwinkle are. Rocky remains the intelligent optimist, Bullwinkle remains the lovable idiot, Boris and Natasha are still hilariously incompetent, Fearless Leader is still over the top, the fourth wall humor is everywhere, the narrator becomes part of the comedy, puns continue non-stop, characters acknowledge they're fictional. I will say though, if you didn't watch the show before watching the movie, you will get confused by the randomness of the jokes. Because that's the entire cartoon, it's just random. Another similarity is the tone. The movie never pretends to be realistic, nobody questions why a flying squirrel and a talking moose exist, nobody worries about the scientific accuracy, plots become increasingly ridiculous simply because they're funny. That's exactly how the cartoon worked. Both versions celebrate absurdity over logic. Neither cares whether the plot makes complete sense because the jokes are the priority. Both also poke fun at television, politics, Hollywood, and pop culture. Perhaps most importantly, neither version talks down to kids. Adults get just as much entertainment, sometimes more. The storytelling between the two feels similar. The television show often placed its heroes into impossible situations, only for them to escape in increasingly ridiculous ways. The movie follows the same formula. Every time Rocky and Bullwinkle solve one problem, another even stranger obstacle appears. It creates the feeling that they're simply wandering from one absurd situation to another, which perfectly captures the spirit of the original cartoon. Finally, both versions understood something incredibly important. Rocky and Bullwinkle have never been about action, or breathtaking animation, or even emotional drama. It's about making people laugh through ridiculous situations, clever writing, and characters who are impossible not to love. In that respect, I think the movie succeeds much more than what people give it credit for. Despite the movie staying surprisingly faithful, there are still some major differences between the series and the movie. For one, the biggest change is the structure of the story. The television series told its adventures in short, serialized chapters. Every episode ended on a dramatic cliffhanger, complete with the narrator teasing the next installment with another terrible pun. The movie, on the other hand, tells one continuous adventure from beginning to end. It has a traditional 3-act Hollywood structure, even if everything is happening inside that structure is completely insane. Another major difference is the setting. The original cartoon exists entirely within its own animated universe. The movie introduces the idea that Rocky and Bullwinkle are fictional television characters who literally step out of their cartoon and into our world. It's a surprisingly clever premise because it gives them the opportunity to not just comment on the series, but to comment on adaptations themselves. And this won't be the last time we see an idea like this. The film constantly asks questions like, what happens when cartoon stars become forgotten celebrities? What happens when fictional villains finally get access to the real world? Those aren't questions the original show ever had to answer. Visually, the two productions couldn't be more different. The original series relied on extremely limited television animation because of budget constraints. Ironically, these limitations become part of the charm. The movie had a significantly larger budget and combined CGI, characters with live-action actors, elaborate sets, visual effects, and large-scale action sequences. One of the biggest differences is the addition of Karen's sympathy. She doesn't exist in the original series at all. Hollywood often feels the need to include a human character whenever cartoon characters are brought into live action, partly so audiences have someone normal to relate to. And Karen fills that role perfectly here. She acts as the audience surrogate, reacting to the absurdity around her, while Rocky and Bullwinkle treat everything as perfectly normal. And she works well enough, but longtime fans will probably be more interested in the cartoon characters rather than the human subplot. Perhaps the biggest difference, though, is the audience. The original cartoon was released during a time when families gathered around one television every week to watch new episodes. The movie arrived over 40 years later for an audience that in many cases had never seen the original show. I didn't have this issue though. I was lucky enough to watch reruns of the show in the 90s, but by the time they decided to make a movie, I had already moved on to other things like Pokemon, Digimon, Dragon Ball Z, and so when the movie came out, I don't really remember any excitement about going to watch the movie. And there were a lot of kids in that same boat. That ended up being a challenge for the filmmakers. They had to walk a very difficult line. They wanted longtime fans to recognize the humor and characters they grew up with, but they also had to introduce Rocky and Bullwinkle to an entirely new generation. Whether they completely succeeded is certainly debatable, but I think it's obvious they approached the adaptation with genuine affection for the source material. And I'll be honest, in a world full of adaptations that completely miss the point of what made the original special in the first place, I can always appreciate when one takes the time to appreciate what came before it. So was the leap from 1960s animation to 2000 live action worth it? I'm going to be honest. When I first started working on this review, I was planning on coming in and absolutely ripping this movie apart. Because, like I said, I didn't really watch the movie growing up. Yeah, I watched the show, but when the movie came out, I was watching other things at the time. So I don't really remember a time where I was excited for this movie to come out. I don't remember going to see it in theaters. I don't even remember going to sit down and watch it in the living room when I was bored. But honestly, sitting down and watching it and the animation, it kind of gave me a different perspective. And so for me, I'm going to say yes, but with an asterisk. This isn't a movie that improves on the original. It's not trying to. Instead, it feels like one giant love letter to the television series. It keeps the weird humor, the terrible puns, the fourth wall jokes, the bizarre villains. It even keeps the feeling that absolutely anything can happen. The problem though, Rocky and Bullwinkle's style of comedy is incredibly niche. As I've said in the past, adaptations can be a gateway into the world of whatever it is that it's trying to adapt. But sometimes, adaptations can fail to bring along new people. And this was one of those situations. If you enjoyed the cartoon, there was probably a good chance you'd at least appreciate just how committed this movie is to preserving its spirit. If you've never seen the original, you're probably going to spend at least half the movie wondering if everybody was hyped up on too much coffee. Personally, I respect the fact that Hollywood didn't try to turn Rocky into an action hero or Bullwinkle into some emotionally conflicted protagonist. They stayed true to who these characters have always been. Sometimes that faithfulness makes for an entertaining experience. Sometimes it makes for a movie that's just weird. But honestly, I'd rather watch a weird movie that understands its source material rather than a polished movie that completely misses the point. So for me, the movie is somewhat worth it in an original work that honors the cartoon. It doesn't make it better in any way, but it reminds us why people enjoyed Rocky and Bullwinkle in the first place. But that's all the time that we have for today. Did you enjoy Rocky and Bullwinkle? Did you like the movie? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video today, consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and ringing that notification bell so you're notified next time we post. Until next time, from page to screen and everything in between, this has been The Big Screen Leap.
And so our host leaves, having finally made peace with his narrator.
I didn't agree to that.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't.
Would you stop arguing? The episode's over.
Okay, fine. Bye, everyone.
Ha, I win.
Okay, I heard that.